uh, live to YouTube. So let's get started. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to give a little bit of housekeeping for Zoom. For users who are coming into Zoom, please type your questions into the Q&A box or press the raise hand box, and then I can call on you and you can ask your question by voice and engage in a dialogue with us. If you prefer to type your question in the Q&A box and not engage, that's fine. But be sure to use that and not the chat box. And okay, so let's actually begin. Hello, I'm Miriam Bale, and I'm the artistic director of the Indie Memphis Film Festival and Cinema. And it is my great pleasure tonight to host a Q&A for our film this week, our featured film, which is Corneliu Porumboiu's The Whistlers. And our guest today is a friend of Indie Memphis and a friend of mine, Richard Brody from The New Yorker. Welcome, Richard.
Miriam, thank you very much. I'm glad to be joining you tonight.
Join in. Let me see. Let's see. This cat is usually okay.
Cinematic.
So, a very cinematic cat. Usually, I try to get rid of her, but somehow she decided to join the picture this time. So we will begin the conversation with. So hello to everyone who's watching at YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, if you have a question for Richard, once we get to the Q&A portion, please go ahead and use the comment section. Type in a comment and it will get to us, and we'll be sure to address as many questions as we can. So Richard, we're talking about The Whistlers tonight, which is a film that I just thought was so charming and is so interesting and smart, and I loved seeing when we were programming it that some of the most enthusiastic writing about it came from you. And I think our audience will have been a mixture of people who know Porumboiu's work very well and people that this is their first film by his that they've seen. So for people whose I expect that those experiences will be very different, but both very interesting. And I wonder if you can, I think that this film is in some ways there's another police film starring a lead character with the same name, one of the same actors, not playing the Christie character. He made a film a little over 10 years ago called Police Adjective. And that film is so different than this police film. Can you comment a little bit about what's different and what's similar?
Sure. You know, it's funny because as a moviegoer, I kind of believe in having pure and fresh experiences, and generally feel that it isn't necessary to have done an awful lot of homework and to have prepared by watching a director's previous body of work in order to appreciate a film, which is to say it can help, but a film that isn't immediately appreciable, except with reference to previous work, I consider that something of a problem, an aesthetic problem. But this film is in some way both different aesthetically from Porumboiu's other films, including Police Adjective, and yet very tightly tied to his entire career thematically, which is one of the things that makes this such a fascinating film. I think of Porumboiu, Police Adjective, to start with Police Adjective, even the title of the film is a linguistic conundrum that is made clear in the course of the film. It's a police story that does involve an investigation, but it also turns on, literally, it pivots on the dictionary. It's about the definition of words, the use of language. And there are extended scenes in which the protagonist, the younger officer, and his wife, who's a literature professor, spend a tremendous amount of time discussing, the definitions of words, the use of language. It's tempting to say that Porumboiu is a linguistic director, but I think that it goes further than that. I think Porumboiu is essentially an epistemological director. His first feature, which we call here 1208 East of Bucharest, the Romanian title translates to, was it there? Like, did it happen there or did it not happen there? And the subject is an act of revolution in late 1989 when the Ceausescu regime was being overthrown. The film centers on a TV broadcast where people who were present then discuss what in fact happened in the small town where the broadcast is happening and where they lived at the time. For the Whistlers, it's much a movie about language. The whistling, there are no spoilers, right? Everybody who we're talking with tonight has seen the film just now, is that right?
Well, let's say that some people may be tuning in before they watch it. I think most people have watched it, but some people may watch this later before they've seen it. So if there's a way to talk around it without major spoilers, that would be best.
Good, I'm good. Yeah, the whistling is a language. The subject of the film is a police officer played by Vlad Ivanov, who is a Romanian police officer working in Bucharest, who is sent, for reasons that you will find out, to one of the Canary Islands called La Gomera, where there's a local language in which letters and phonemes are replaced by whistling. And this language is being used by drug dealers with whom the officer is involved in order to avoid the surveillance that inevitably comes with conversations on cell phones. So on one level, it's very much of a movie about language, but it's worth pairing this film with another film of Porumboiu's called When Evening Falls on Bucharest, or Metabolism. That's the other film that's very much centered on the world of movies. If you look at Porumboiu's career, he's stylistically, you would say he's a sort of, and it's a term I kind of hate, a sort of slow cinema practitioner. He tends to use very long takes in which long dialogue scenes or long observational scenes unfold very meticulously over great periods of time in single shots. Metabolism is a film about the cinema. It's about a filmmaker, it's about an actress, it's also about the use of a camera in ways other than cinematic. I think it's just the way that Uncut Gems is an internal and intestinal film. So Metabolism is a gastric film. Metabolism is a film about endoscopy as much as it's a film about movie making. So it's essentially about creating creating images and what happens, I think, behind and, let's say, within the scenes. This movie takes movies from the other end, so to speak, from the user's side of movie making.
Oh dear.
This is very much a movie. Like, it's a self-consciously winking movie. And it's not obvious from the beginning how much it winks. But by the time you get to the end of the movie, you will have caught a tremendous number of really hilarious and really overt references to movie history and to the paraphernalia, to the realm of cinema, to the artifice of cinema. The style of this film is different. If you planted a viewer in front of this film who had seen everything that Porumboiu had made before. Thematically, it meshes perfectly with his entire body of work, but stylistically, it's drastically different.
Mhm.
And I think the reason why it's drastically different is that he's in effect quoting the kinds of movies that he, loves and is interested in, but does not make. The entire movie, in a certain way, is in quotations.
Absolutely. The references are so much fun, especially for a movie fan. I think it wouldn't be too much of a spoiler to talk about some of the references. I think, obviously, we talked about the whistling as a language, and there's a whistling callback in The Searchers. Is that right? Are they watching? They're watching The Searchers, and someone for one of those perfect clandestine meetings in a movie theater, but in this one, she decides to stay and watch the movie. And then there's there's a cinema stage, a set, and one thing. Are there other references that you were particularly delighted by? Maybe even some of our some viewers might not have caught on the first time.
Psycho.
Of course. No, that might be a spoiler. No, say no more.
Right, well, it's a crime movie, so it should be no surprise that there's, and one of the crucial sets in the movie, one of the crucial locations in the movie, is a motel, a remote motel, with a lonely clerk. But I won't say more than that. It's very, in any case, it comes in a rather brilliant way. But at the same time, I think that the fact that it's a movie somewhat in quotation marks has thrown off some critics, including some really superb critics, who find this a rather coy and tricky crime film, because at the first level, it is very much of a crime drama. In fact, I think it's a very brilliantly constructed crime drama. And if you didn't care about Porumboiu and Romanian cinema and epistemological cinema, I think that at the first level, as a cleverly constructed thriller, it works very well that way. But it's very tricky. It's got lots of you have to just figure out whether they're flashbacks or flash forwards. And there's a moment that I don't actually want to spoil, but let's say if you wanted a literal dramatic representation of the idea of a character's past catching up with him, that's what happens. At a certain moment in this film, the flashbacks and the flash forwards converge in a way that's, to my mind, to a viewer who's interested in being thrilled. I mean, I was jolted by it.
Have you seen it once, Richard, or more than once?
I saw it twice. I saw it when it came out at the New York Film Festival, and then recently.
And how did you find the chronology and the flashbacks and fast forward? Did you find? I mean, obviously, you always find new things in the second watch. But what can you tell me a little bit about? Was it extra thrilling for you on the second watch?
Yeah, I think I did enjoy it more than, I loved it the first time, but the second time around, where you actually see how well the pieces fit together. I mean, in a way, pieces fitting together are kind of pet peeve of mine. This is the televisual disease of serial plots that are constructed in such a way that they have to dovetail from episode to episode, and that dovetailing essentially ties directors, to mix my metaphors, ties directors' eyes behind their backs. But here it's entirely different. Here, the meshing is part of the idea. Here, the epistemological theme that Porumboiu has been pursuing throughout his career. Here, one of the things that he's obsessed with is Romanian history. Is how you learn about history, how you understand history, the connection between personal history and grand history, the connection between experience and knowledge, or the gap between what you believe to be your experience and what you may come to realize is your knowledge. There's this wonderful film called The Treasure, where the way I think about it is, his previous films, he uses language to excavate Romanian history. In The Treasure, he uses shovels to excavate Romanian history. It's very much a film about, physically digging and seeing what you find and realizing that the discoveries, the physical objects have meanings that go far beyond what you immediately took them to imply. In The Whistlers, the kind of the overarching question of a thriller is for me, I hate to call it a metaphor, but an artistic figure of like how history fits together, how the past and the present link, how a trace that you catch in the past echoes in the present, how something that's happening now has its meaning deeply buried in some previous event that if you were unaware of that previous event would make no sense whatsoever.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing the film unfold in the way that you're talking about.
And one of the reasons why I think his let's say his epistemology shifts to the aesthetic here. In other words, the reason why this movie about those connections between past and present take place in the movie realm, in the realm of watching movies, thinking about movies, thinking cinematically, is that for him, aesthetic experience as such is the best model for that kind of understanding. In other words, that his movie making isn't merely an illustration of these ideas. It's actually the creation of these ideas and the enactment of these ideas. In other words, when he makes a movie about Romanian history, it's not about Romanian history. He's actually doing that exploration in the present tense. And here, by means of referring to The Searchers and referring to Psycho and referring to a movie set, and for that matter, referring to the tropes of thrillers, the tropes of thrillers in general, whether visual or dramatic, he's essentially saying, this is how we figure stuff out. The reason we love movies in the first place is that they help us understand what more literal approaches to history, politics, identity, self don't.
That's very true. I'm also very fascinated by the way he uses sound, in particular music especially. And in this film, he is able to play with it so much in ways that he's used before. There's the classic film techniques. He's a real film fan because of the way he uses musical motifs, like the way that they come back and the way that they're displayed in different ways. A character playing a song or humming a song or as soundtrack. And do you have any comments on the way he uses music in this film?
No, I think you just said it. That's exactly kind of one of the things that does happen with the music, and I won't, is that the name of the motel is the Opera Motel, so opera is being heard there. But the music, to use a term that I hate, it leaps back and forth between being diegetic and being ornamental or in a commentary. It moves from being inside the action, music that's a character in the film is listening to within the scene, and the music that essentially becomes the equivalent of a score.
Absolutely. And he uses it just so cleverly. I think people always use I think you said that people can consider his films wry is often a word that comes up. The humor in his films, in his technique and in the language is delightful. And in this, there are new delights in the way. This is maybe too general of a question, but you've written a lot about realism, and in a film like you've talked about his long takes in previous films, and this is the opposite of that. And yet, this film is away from realism, very much so. But his other films have done these long takes, but have not, have somehow avoided traps of realism in their mundaneness and in the length. And I know we're talking about a different film, but I find that so fascinating that someone can go from these totally different styles and yet avoid this place in between that we often think of as realism, where it's very fake but imitating realism in a sort of in-between place that is kind of nowhere.
No, I agree with you, which is to say basically every other Romanian director except for Radu Iuda.
Oh my goodness.
The thing about Porumboiu's so-called realism, and I see exactly what you mean, is that one of the things I try not to do, although it's a trap that I fall into anybody else every now and then, is not to think about such categories like realism strictly in technical terms, in the sense that, neither to fetishize nor to damn a particular technique. So, a movie like Police Adjective, well, it's realistic in the literal sense that, the action that's being filmed is the stuff that the characters do. And, there are no dream sequences and there are no fantasy sequences. And, everything that happens in the film could indeed happen in the streets of that town. But what detaches it from itself, so to speak, what creates that distance is the idea. The ideas that the movie works with it creates them into, to borrow and distort Mary Douglas's wonderful phrase, it becomes a natural symbol.
Absolutely.
The reality becomes a natural symbol in Porumboiu's work.
I love that.
And in this film, that process is a little more complex because the realism is a little more stylized. Like it's a little more conspicuously artificial without being less real. That's because of its relationship to movies that people recognize, the more familiar tropes of cinematic construction.
Interesting. I want to ask you
like
something about
the ending. I didn't mean to interrupt, but like realism, the ending.
The ending is
because
amazing.
People haven't, I don't want to spoil it, but does it have one ending or does it have two endings? Where does the movie actually end?
And yeah, it's the use of fantasy is so interesting, and this brings up the use of fantasy and also what you just said about cinema tropes. I think you mentioned that this is him making films that he likes to watch, aren't necessarily the films in the past he's made, films that are the films he loves. And okay, so here's something I'd like to ask you about. Richard, we have known each other for a long time, and we first met each other when I talked to you about your book about Jean-Luc Godard, and I brought up to you some things that I found. I love him, and yet I find some things in his work quite sexist. And and it had opened your eyes to that. I don't think you had seen that in his work. And in this film, and I will say that that's true of most cinema by men. It's a little sexist. There's little bits of sexism, especially films by heterosexual male directors. And in this film, there's a beautiful main character named Gilda, and already that's cinema. It's, back to the Rita Hayworth film Gilda. And she's like Gilda, the Rita Hayworth film, she's unreal. She's perfect. She's wonderful. And yet there's a little bit of sexism in that character, yet it's so accurate to a kind of cinema that it's almost documentary-like of that kind of role in the history of cinema, but yet it's a little bit sexist. And yet because her name is Gilda, I suppose it works. Like Rita Hayworth always said that people, went to bed with, that Gilda wasn't real. They went to bed with the character she played, Gilda, and they woke up with Rita Hayworth and were disappointed. So in some ways it makes sense. But did you find things about this character, I mean, was this something I'm seeing and that you didn't see?
You know, I see it in one particular way. There's a, you know, to be blunt, there's a nude scene,
Mm-hmm.
and Gilda is nude, and you know, Christie's nude, but his body's not seen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this Porumboyu brought this problem up in Metabolism, where
Yes.
the story of the film is a director who's making a film and he wants the actress to play a nude scene, and that becomes a subject of contention between them. You know, I think he's playing with a trope here. I think he knows exactly where this character, the femme fatale, fits into the framework of a movie like this. I'm sorry. Needless to say, she's a character with a great deal of agency.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, she had so much agency that without her, there's no movie.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not the only woman with a great deal of agency. It's actually pretty interesting that it's almost like this Hitchcockian dichotomy of the police captain named Magda, who, you know, Gilda has dark hair, Magda has blonde hair. You know, she's a cold Hitchcockian blonde.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of a femme fatale. Well,
Yeah.
actually not true. For Hitchcock, a femme fatale, but in this film, fatale in an altogether different way.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, one subject that you have written about and discussed in great detail is the movie of the female double, the twinned or paired females. This movie has it. No spoilers, but this movie has it in an exemplary form.
I know exactly the spoiler you want to talk about, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And we encourage everyone who hasn't watched it yet to watch it. And if you've seen it, watch it again. But I think that the character of Gilda I wouldn't call her a femme fatale exactly. You could say that she has some of that costume of a femme fatale, but without really that agency, that mystery, but she does have agency, the character. I think it's more the way he films her body, and it's very subtle, and she's wonderful, but she's very ornamental, and in a way that is sort of hard to nail. Like you know it when you see it, a little bit of a difference between I couldn't quite articulate what it is about it, but I think you're right. He's reckoning with it. He's dealing with it in his Metabolism, in the film you were talking about. It's very interesting because that film starts with a discussion of a nude scene, and then there's a sex scene that we don't see. And in this, there's a sex scene that you talked about where you see her nude and you don't see him, and they're doing it for the cameras, for the surveillance cameras, but for the cameras. And I think he's obviously very aware of it. And, you know, he starts a film about the male director. And in this, there's he's obviously has enough depth and humor to take the piss out of the director. There's a director in this film, or maybe he's a location scout. No, I think he's a director, isn't he?
He's a filmmaker. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he can take.
He claims to be a filmmaker.
Fair enough. He's just looking.
No,
it's true, and he's just looking at beautiful locations. You know, that's so interesting. It really, this film really plays with the film as, tourism board. You know, but in a wonderful, beautiful way. Like it takes place in the Canary Islands, and that film director character, the filmmaker, is looking for locations, and it really, it's so. It's such a beautiful film. It's like candy, but very smart candy or something like that. There you go. I wanted to, we'll start to open up to questions. So if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. There's a raise hand button, or type it into the Q&A box while you're thinking of your question. Or if you're on YouTube, please send a comment, and then the question will get to me. But Richard, before I open it up to questions, I wanted to talk to you. This is our third of these movie club discussions, and we have also in all of these talked about, the first film that we watched was the director of Bacurau, and we talked about how his film suddenly went from theaters to online distribution. And he said, talking about pluses and minuses, he said for him it was all pluses. And, he and I wouldn't have been able to have a Q&A for his film for Memphis and the wider public without This Strange New World. And we've been talking to other people about how this new time and the age of COVID-19 and coronavirus has changed the way. You are the goings on about town editor of the New Yorker, and right now no one's going on about town at all. And so can you tell me a little bit about how that's changed your job, your relationship to movies, what you're covering?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about goings on about town is that it has always been something of a paradox. I mean, long before COVID-19 and even long before, streaming, the very section is something of a paradox, because the New Yorker is called the New Yorker, but it's a national magazine. And, with online distribution, it becomes a worldwide magazine. And yet the artistic events that we cover are all for at least a decade, certainly since 2009 or so. I've been very consciously covering in the section movies that are available streaming, along with movies that are in theatrical release, on the grounds that even a relatively unfamiliar international film or independent film that is streaming is instantly in wider release than something in 3,000 multiplexes. It's playing on the same field of accessibility, so to speak, as the widest release movies, and therefore justifies its presence in the section. And certainly for the last few years, when movies are streaming, I take note of it in the section. And now the mix is simply shifted from a mix to 100 to 0. So it's a shift, but it's not a complete turnaround. It's just moving things, in one particular, as far as possible in one particular direction, which will then, shift back to a different proportion when movie theaters open. The real difference is the definition of an event. In other words, with openings, eventness defines itself. Even with revivals, eventness defines itself. Whereas now, because relatively few films are being released streaming. In other words, most of the major studio films, most of the major independent films, except for the ones that already opened, most of the major international films, except for the ones that are already opened, are being held back. I actually think that what's going on is that distributors basically just think that people aren't going to pay enough online to justify substituting it for theatrical release. No, people might pay $5.99 or $6.99, but the price point of $19.99 that might be charged for a new release online, even if a family of 2 or 3 or 4 might pay a lot more than that to see a movie in theaters, the idea of paying $20 to see a movie at home, even for a family, I think a lot of people are not ready to do that, are not ready for that. And so studios are just going to and smaller distributors are just pushing things to later in the year and even to next year. As a result, eventness changes. So for instance, in the issue that is out on newsstands now, one of the series that I'd been looking forward to greatly was the second part of the Afrofuturism series at BAM, revival series that Ashley Clark programmed. So I was able to mention the fact that the series was supposed to happen and to discuss a wonderful documentary about Sun Ra that relates to that series. I Am Not a Witch is being released by the Criterion channel this week, so that becomes an event. But by and large, what the shift to 100% streaming does is it essentially opens the field to movies that aren't events and that I think are worth bringing attention to for readers. Think that readers, might enjoy watching now, a wide range of things, whether it's Cinema Verité, that, the wonderful film by Shari Springer Berman and Robert Pulcini about the making of An American Family, the drama about it, or Johnny O'Clock, or Pain and Gain.
You wrote a wonderful list of movies on Netflix that are available, and you mentioned retrospective titles. I think that right now, everything has changed so quickly. We have done I think we were about to open an art house cinema this month right now, and instead we're doing an art house cinema online, and we're doing titles from we did one retrospective title. We did Donna Floor and Her Two Husbands, but I would love to do more retrospective titles which haven't been quite. I would love to see more retrospective titles available for streaming, and I would like to screen those for our audiences. How are you, since this is a film, The Whistlers, which is about a movie about movies, how are you finding, where do you find some of the best sources to find old films? It's okay if it's illegal, or you don't have to say it if it's illegal.
No. I'm literally just thinking because, the funny thing about streaming is on the one hand, it's a cornucopia, and on the other hand, I kind of feel with streaming the way I felt in the age of the video store. We happen to live near a great video store that just closed. It was in business for more than 30 years, called almost 40 years, called The Video Room. And the Video Room was a real cinematheque of a video store. But even so, I'd go in and I'd be overwhelmed by the options, and yet say to myself, it has every movie except the one I'm looking for. And that's even more true on streaming. So, you take what you can get. And at the same time, look, one of the reasons why I'm so agnostic about platforms, which is to say one of the reasons why I'm perfectly happy to watch movies on my TV or on my computer. And I'm not, frankly, I love going to the movies. I love seeing things in theaters, but I guess I'm not crestfallen to watch something at home. On the contrary, I like being able to drive. Is that for a long period of time, I didn't have home video. I started watching movies in an era before home video, and I would just go to see movies, 3 movies a day, the same movie, 10 times in a week. So I got a very strong, inoculation of big screen time. I don't know how we got onto the side. Oh, so I take them where I find them. Netflix doesn't have a lot of older movies, but I found a few things there that I was really happy to find. Amazon has some fine things. YouTube has some great things. Criterion Channel is, to my mind, the gold standard for classic movies, especially classic international movies. Wherever you're lucky enough to find something.
Absolutely. I think that I want to open it up to questions. Please use the Q&A box, or also some of you are being shy. I would love if some of the people on this call had a question about the Whistlers, or it could be a question about in general to Richard. Feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. Or who has a talk? Are you using the wrong? Okay. What a shy bunch. I know that someone has a question. Is it because they can hide? Because I can't make eye contact with you? Let's
Usually
see.
when people hide, it emboldens them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Except in this, we actually can call on people, which is a nice, and they don't want to, they want to stay invisible. Okay, um, well, let's talk. Well, I'll start then. I've already asked all the questions, but I want to talk about the premise of the film is, as we've talked about, and it's about using whistling as a language, and it's so it's it's so smart and yet so elemental about what language is to do. And wasn't there also something about a whistling language in Miguel Gomez's Arabian Nights, or just something about birds? Maybe it wasn't about whistling,
Birds,
right?
yeah.
But
But
I think
you know that now that you mention it, you know, there's the question in this movie is, you know how to whistle, don't you?
that's right. Howard Hawks. That's so funny. I didn't even catch that.
And then, if we're going to be even more Hawksian,
Always.
the lesson. So the guy who asks Christy, "Do you know how to whistle, don't you?" And he shows him. You put your finger in your mouth. I don't even want to. But
oh, Richard, I think we're getting R-rated here.
we're getting Hawksian here. We're bringing up David.
That's really getting to the root of Hawks. That's so funny. Yeah, and there's something also just basically about there's something so basic about dialogue and films being, I mean, he's someone who's so obsessed with breaking down what is language and what is dialogue and what are adjectives. And in this, it's like, what is, you know, when you watch a film in a language you don't understand, it's even without the subtitles, it's the sound, it's the rhythms, it's even if it's in a language you do understand. I've talked to you a lot about screwball comedy, and it just becomes, and that's another Hawks thing. He would do the thing with the cushion dialogue that, you know, that it was okay to miss some of the dialogue because so much of it was about the rhythm and the sound, and this really just kind of breaks that down into a plot point.
Well,
I mean, it becomes language.
Well, the first line in this is, "Do you speak Spanish?"
Oh, right.
The first line in this film is, "Do you speak Spanish?" And the answer is no. And the question is, English? Yes. So a Spanish guy and a Romanian guy speak English together.
Absolutely.
And
I know.
One of the things that the whistling is used for is to communicate. Like, there's whistling in Romanian and whistling in Spanish. And Gilda is the character who knows both languages. So she receives a whistle in one language and communicates by whistling in another language, so that the people who are speaking Spanish and don't speak Romanian, or speak Romanian and don't speak Spanish, can communicate.
Oh, yeah. That's another way that she has agency. That's true. She's the one, she's the only one who understands everything. Yes.
She's the only one who understands. She's also, she's also the one who, let's put it this way, decides whether the sex is real or not.
Right.
I mean, that to me is the main femme fatale characteristic. You know,
that's true.
Was she having sex because she wants to have sex, or was she having sex because it was a performance that was required for the sake of the criminal deception, the criminal plot? I'm not going to spoil to say which it is, but it is a plot point. She's the boss.
Point well taken. That is very femme fatale. Absolutely. Okay, so we have a question from Dylan, and I will. So now, Dylan, you are in the conversation, and if you can unmute yourself, Dylan, great. Hi, Dylan.
Hi there. Thank you very much. I was actually typing my question, but I guess I can just kind of say it out loud. First of all, I'm really, really glad you discussed the epistemological element of this film. The only other film I've seen of porn boils is Metabolism, When Evening Falls in Bucharest, but I haven't seen that. I only saw it when it came out, so about 5 or 6 years ago. But I was thinking more about what you were talking about, the the interest of filmmaking itself, the act of filmmaking, the epistemological nature of filmmaking itself. And you just mentioned it in terms of like them performing sex in front of the surveillance cameras, but I'm just curious, like, is there any other elements of performativity, of like performativity as like the focus of the film? Are there any other elements to that you've picked up on or that you've kind of read more into?
Oh, well, there's an awful lot of it, actually. And I'm going to avoid spoilers, but there's an awful lot of it because there's an awful lot of surveillance in this film. So, for instance, a sex scene that's happening under the surveillance cameras of the police officer who's treating it like pornography. I mean, it's unbelievably funny. Police interrogations taking place in front of a one-way mirror or two-way mirror rather, where there's a question as to whether the interrogation is an actual interrogation or a staged routine.
Dylan, is there
I think the theme of performance, of deception, but that's the funny thing is that that's a constant in movies no less than in life. In other words, any thriller you watch is a game of people deceiving each other. The difference is that in this movie, people are deceiving each other under each other's gazes, like the observation and the interpretation of those deceptions is integrated into the action.
I only watched it once last night, so I'm looking forward to a second viewing to kind of pick more up on those on that kind of reading. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Okay, so now we have everyone became less shy in that moment. So let's see. There's a question. Oh, here's a really interesting question from Molly, and from Molly Wexler. Did you find any of the score to have whistling type music incorporated into it? I sensed that and found it brilliant.
The Uta Lemper version of Mac the Knife.
Oh, that's right. That was so beautiful. And then Molly also has a question. She said, I love the scene at the beginning when they entered the tunnel and the credits played. Was that a reference to another famous film?
That's a very good question. I was actually wondering the same thing, and I think it is, and I'm not sure what. Actually,
yeah.
Godard does it, but not quite that way. But I think it might be from a classic film noir that's eluding my memory.
Interesting. Maybe if someone else did catch that reference, there's so many references. Feel free to tweet at us or to write it in the comments on this YouTube, if you're on YouTube, or in the chat here. Here's another question from Sissy. Sissy Jankova. Hi, how do you feel about the current future appetite for foreign films for English-speaking audiences in relationship to streaming in particular? Do films like this feel more digestible because of this genre? That's something we didn't really talk about, genre, and we didn't talk about how much fun there is with genre. So is a Romanian film more digestible in this genre? And what do you think about streaming films and accessibility?
Well, I think we can judge by the prominence that this film is getting compared to Porumboiu's other films. Although what's funny is that I think critically, I actually think that a movie like Police Adjective got better reviews overall than this, precisely because this one, I don't know. I mean, I happen to hate the idea of genre, frankly. For me, genre is a crutch for critics, and it's a sort of a consent where they can by means of knowing a great deal of movies in a particular genre, by knowing a great deal of movies, in other words, the province of criticism, you can condense that knowledge into a club with which you beat a new movie. And that's what happens here. That, by dint of, your critical scholarship, you, not you and not me, but some critics who find a movie like Police Adjective, eminently acceptable because it's, let's say, straightforward genre-free realism that doesn't overtly refer to other movies. It's almost as if the Whistlers were somehow challenging and defying an accepted body of knowledge and set of conventions. And it's complicated. I mean, The Whistlers is a complicated movie. And you asked me if I watched it more than once, which is a really good question because it really does help. There's a lot going on. It's like watching a film by Alain Resnais in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. With the way it plays with time, especially, and the sort of cleverness. Resnais used to write these, would you describe them? Almost scores for the way that the film played with time, and it really looked like musical scores. And you're right. I'm looking forward to seeing it again.
Well, I think that with the releasability, so to speak, of a film, genre helps, but with critics, one never knows.
It's so true. I think you're totally right. Police Adjective, his films this film is, as I said, sort of, his films that are less like candy were definitely better reviewed than this film, which got some mixed messages and mixed reviews.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. What were you
playfulness, the fact that this movie
absolutely
refers to other movies and kind of winks at itself along the way. There are people who are offended by this idea. They were offended by it, in 1960 with Breathless, and they're offended by it today with The Whistlers. The idea that something takes you outside the action and outside the drama and outside the immediate identification with character. It's very troubling to some critics in a way that I think is not troubling to viewers. I think, Gil Perez wrote beautifully, Gil Perez's last book, The Eloquent Screen, background. Gilberto Perez was my professor in college, a brilliant critic and a brilliant professor and a wonderful man, who died a few years ago, and he just completed a book about the rhetoric of film called The Eloquent Screen, which was published late last year. And it's very much centered on a subject that you and I have talked about a lot, namely melodrama. And one of the things that he emphasizes with melodrama is that by its very nature of excess, melodrama stands outside of itself. That the very essence of, the mistaken idea of constant identification with characters in a realistic space is a critical delusion that is antithetical both to the history of cinema and to the ordinary experience of watching movies. Nobody forgets that they're watching a movie. Only an insane person, only a clinically insane person forgets they're watching a movie. You're always inside and outside. Inside and outside is the essence of the medium, the essence of the art.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a critical habit of defining according to a fairly narrow set of rules, which, by the way, brings us back to Porenboy's previous film, Infinite Football, which is the great film about rules and their effect on reality.
Absolutely.
A documentary about a brilliant crank who wants to change the rules of soccer in the belief that doing so will actually bring about something like grand-scale political progress.
Yes. So we hope that our viewers will, who haven't seen some of his other films, will check out some of the films we mentioned. And as we mentioned, maybe this film is worth seeing again, or if some of you are seeing this Q&A before you see the film, please see the film. I'm sure you're tempted to now. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll be back we'll be back next week at the same slot. We've been really enjoying doing these conversations. And Richard, it's so nice to see you. It's so nice to talk about movies with you at any time. And thank you so much for joining us.
Miriam, I feel the same way. It's good to see you literally, and it's good to talk with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. And so we'll say good night. And I hope some of you will tune back next week. And if you haven't watched some of our other films, we also have the Traitor, which is another genre film. Richard hates genre, but I like it. And maybe we'll talk more about genre next week. And I hope you're all well. Thanks again. Bye, Richard.
Bye, Miriam. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.